Alright, so for this video, we're going to be analyzing AOC. We're going to see her facial analysis and how attractive she is. Now, her overall facial rating is a 7.3. How rare is that? That's 1 in 300 people. The percentile of people is a top 0.3%. Her side facial score is a 61%. Her front facial score is a 79%. Her total facial harmony score is a 72%. Her facial dimorphism is a 5. Her body fat factors is a 9. And her miscellaneous features is an 8. Now, before I start, I wasn't really sure if AOC was that attractive. I thought she would be more like top 13 percentile. But the fact that she's that much higher at 0.3% is kind of surprising me. So I did go on Reddit and some other forums to check to see if other people agreed, and I guess they do. So we're gonna just break down and see why that is. So the tier list: tier 1, ideal; tier 2, near ideal; tier 3, normal; tier 4, slight flaw; tier 5, flaw; tier 6, huge flaw; and tier 7, breaks harmony. Now this is the overall facial assessment breakdown of the things that I noticed that were the biggest flaws. The nose is upturned enough to be considered attractive. The nose is not upturned enough to be considered attractive, my fault. In a female face, a nose that has the base, which is the apex, at a downward trajectory completely unharmonizes the nasal labial angle, even though she has a perfect malocclusion. Alright, so the nasal labial angle, I will talk about that later once we get there. Now her nose isn't upturned enough, and that's not the only thing. Usually for some ethnic groups, it might be because of the jaw protrusion, like the actual upper jaw protrusion might hinder that angle as well, but she doesn't have that factor, so that's indicates how downswung her nose really is. So the next one is the submental cervical angle isn't tight enough for an attractive under neck region. The hyoid bone, which is situated in the area in the upper neck portion, sticks out too far. In this case, this would be considered as having a high hyoid, although she doesn't have any submental fat or loose skin underneath the chin/jaw, which are usually contributing factors to having a bad cervical angle. So she doesn't have any fat underneath the jaw, but she has a very high hyoid, so that bone around the neck region protrudes out too far, which creates a wider and an obtuse angle for your cervical angle or your submental cervical angle, and that is not an attractive feature. This right here is the rarity scores of other celebrities, so you can compare. Her eye separation ratio, this is going to be the first measurement, shows how wide set your eyes are relative to your face, and it goes from pupil distance relative to the cheekbone distance, and hers is 47.6%, which is in the ideal range. Her facial thirds is a tier 1. Each third shouldn't deviate more than 3% away from 33, and as you can see, that is not the case, so she does fit within that area, and that is perfect. Her canthal tilt is a tier 4 at 2 degrees. Now women tend to have more upturned eyes, and the fact that her eyes isn't upturned enough means that it's going to be a slight flaw, and once it's usually lower than 2 degrees, that's when it starts looking negative. So if your eyes is around 2-degree range, for the average person looking at you, is gonna just look negative or close to it, either neutral or negative at that point. So if your eyes are around that 2-degree area, that's kind of like the danger zone. Her facial width to height ratio, FWHR, to see how compact her facial features are in her face, is a tier 1 at 1.94. It's on the longer side relative to, because women tend to have more compact mid faces or more compact facial features on average, but hers don't. So even though this is more on the longer side, this is still within the ideal range. Her jaw frontal angle, so the angle in the front of your jaw, is at a tier 1 at 90 degrees, so that is within the middle of the distribution, and that is good. Her cheekbone high settiness, so how high set is her cheekbones relative to her mid face, and this is a tier 1 at 84%, and that means that she does have very high cheekbones, which is youthful, makes the face look more youthful. Her bigonial width is a tier 1 at 86%, so she does have an adequate sized jaw for her width of her face, so her jaw isn't too small or too wide. Her total facial height to width ratio is a tier 5 at 1.4, so her head is on the longer side, and this is going to be a flaw. Now, it's not going to be like a very huge flaw or anything like that, but this is going to be a good enough flaw to decrease some points for her overall attractiveness. So her head is just a little bit on the longer side. If her jaw or let's say her forehead, because she does have a pretty long forehead. If her forehead was a bit shorter in size, she probably would have been closer to the ideal range. Her chin to foot trim ratio is a tier 1 at 2. So you want to be around 2 to 2.5 for a female. And and female also do tend to have smaller chins than men. So that's why it's 2 to 2.5 rather than 2 to 2.55, because men tend to have longer chins. Her neck to width ratio is at a tier 1 at 80%, so she does have an adequate size neck for her jaw width. It goes relative to the jaw width and not the actual width of the head, because the jaw width is the base of the head. The mouth to nose width ratio is a tier 4 at 1.35. Now, what this means that her nose is a little bit wider, is a little bit on the wider side than her lips, all right? So you ideally want your lips to be within the iris of the eyes, which it is for her. But her nose is actually past the inner canvas of the eyes, or the inner part of her eye. And that is not ideal at all. So her nose is a little bit too wide for her face, which is obvious. That would be a slight flaw. Her mid-face ratio is a tier 1, so she does have a good mid-face ratio. It's within the middle of the distribution, so her mid-face ratio isn't really too compact. So it's the eye distance relative to distance between your eye line down to your upper lip, and that determines your mid-face ratio once you divide those two distances. And it should be around 1-to-1, which it is. Her eyebrow settiness, so how high set is her eyebrows relative to her eye line, and hers is at 71%, and this is perfect for a female. You do want your eyebrows to be lower set because it makes the face more striking, and you don't want it to be too low because that would be more on the masculine side, but you don't want it to be too high because that would be more on the feminine side. So you want to have a good balance. Her eye spacing, one width eyes apart, is at 92%, and this is very close to the ideal range. And if this was around the 95-1 or anything closer to that 1 range would be within the ideal. So literally 1 width eyes apart is that perfect range. Her eye aspect ratio is a tier 2 at 3.4. So this means that she does have more of a narrow shaped eyes than a more rounder shaped eyes. For females, you do want to have a more rounder shaped eyes. Now, for AOC, typically we do see her having rounder shaped eyes when she talks, but if you look closely, when she talks and exaggerates a bit, her eyes open up even more, and you can obviously tell, because if you look at the brow, the eyebrows are raised even higher. So usually you want to take measurements when the face is more relaxed. That's a more accurate presentation. Her lower lip to upper lip is a tier 1 at 1.8, and this is perfect for a female, and this is within the ideal range. You don't want your upper lip to be bigger than your lower lip, or taller than your lower lip, preferably. Deviation from the ipsilateral alveolar angle to the jaw frontal angle. You do not want these two angles to deviate more than 15%. Ideally, 5% will be within the ideal range, and hers at 4%. And this is perfect. So it goes from the subnasal all the way to the outer edges of the eyes versus the jaw frontal angle. You want those angles to be parallel with each other. Eyebrow tilt is a tier 1 at 17.5 degrees. So 17.5 is perfectly within the ideal range. Anything higher than around 20 degrees is going to be make you look like a supervillain and uncanny for a female face. Now for a male face, obviously it's going to be a bit lower because males tend to have lower set eyebrows, but for her this is perfectly fine. Her bitemporal width is the forehead exposure. How much forehead exposure do you have relative to your cheekbone width? And for her is at 95%, which is at the highest end of the ideal range, and that is perfectly fine for her. But anything more than this will be outside of the ideal range. Her lower third proportions, you do not want your lower third proportions to be over 33% or 3% over 33%, and it goes from the nose all the way down to the chin or the bottom of the chin, and that should not be more than 33% away from 33%. So it should be literally 1/3 of your lower third portion of your face. Her ipsilateral aliar angle, so this is the angle that I was talking about before of the mid face. You do want your mid face to be parallel to the jaw frontal angle, which it was for her. And also you do want your eyes, and this is a measurement of how wide set your eyes is relative to your face. And for hers, her eyes is on the wider side and we can get that from the ESR as well, but her eyes on the wider side, but based on this angle, because it's at 94%, but still this is still within the ideal range for a female. And also females tend to have more wider set eyes, so for that reason females will have a more increase, so it will go all the way up to 97 degrees for their ipsilateral aliar angle. Now the gonial angle as well is an increase for women because women tend to have less sharper jaws. So this is at the tail end of the ideal range at 128 degrees, and this is a tier 1, so she's at that outside range of it, or the outer range of it, I guess you can say. Her nasofrontal angle is completely off for a female. It's a little bit too obtuse. She doesn't really have a prominent brow region or any brow region at all. If she did have a brow region, that will actually help with some other measurements as well, especially including her facial convexity, which I'll talk about later. And this is a tier 4, which means it is a slight flaw of 147 degrees, and preferably you want to be at least 137, so she is 10 degrees off from the ideal range, so that is a slight flaw. Her mandibular plane angle determines how downswung the mandible is relative to the face, and or relative to the Frankfurt plane angle. So the Frankfurt plane angle is this line that you see across her face right here, and this Frankfurt plane angle is literally parallel to the ground. So that if you bring this Frankfurt plane angle down here, this angle that's created is 16 degrees, and 16 degrees is within the ideal range, but it's within the lower end of the ideal range. So her mandible isn't too downswung. Her ramus to mandible ratio is at 77%, so this is at the highest end of the ideal range. So anything more than this will be outside of the ideal range for a female and male. And this is more on the masculine side. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, she does have a very long ramus for her face, but still this is perfectly fine. Her facial convexity from the glabella is 167 degrees, and 167 degrees is 1 degree away from the ideal range. Literally, like I said again, from her nasal frontal angle, if she did have more of a protrusive brow region right here, this facial convexity would have been within the ideal range. So literally, if she had 1 degree, or literally if she did have a brow region, she would be perfect for her facial convexity from the glabella. So her facial convexity is a little bit too rounded. So facial convexity determines if your facial convexity is round or flat, and hers is a little bit too rounded. Her submental cervical angle, like I explained again, she does have a high hyoid. So her hyoid is right here. This is the upper part of the neck, and you want it to be down here. If her hyoid was right here, it would have been a sharper angle, but she does not have a sharp angle because her hyoid or her neck region protrudes a little bit too far, and that can be either from bad posture or genetics, and I believe that's probably genetics for her, and that is 129 degrees, so that's away from 110, and that is a flaw. Alright, so the nasofacial angle determines the alignment between the chin and the nose, and with this doesn't include her facial convexity, it only includes the chin and the nose relationship, and she does have proper relationship between her chin and her nose at the lower end of 30 degrees, and this is perfectly fine. So her chin and nose do have a good relationship between each other. Her nasolabial angle, like I said again, is a 73 degree. And what I said about the mild inclusion, the upper jaw protrusion, she doesn't have a lot of upper jaw protrusion, and this is good that she don't have a lot of upper jaw protrusion. But what this does entail to me is that it entails that her nose is more on the downswung side of things. So let's say if she did have upper jaw protrusion and her angle was 73, that means that her nose isn't as downswung as we might think it is. But since she does not have upper jaw protrusion and she has low jaw incisors, what this means is that for the angles to be this acute, that means her nose is that much downswung. So that, and you can see it from the front of her face as well. So this is just completely breaks harmony. Her orbital vector is neutral, and neutral is not good or bad, but what this means is that she might gonna start having eye bags around her eyes and maybe dark circles. I won't say dark circles. I would say more like eye bags around the eyes, and it's less attractive because personally want to have bone protrusion that's past the eye area. So what this means is that her eyes might be a little bit protruding a little bit, and yeah. But preferably you do want bone protrusion underneath the eyes, or past the eyes, I guess you can say. Her total facial convexity is the convexity of her face, including her nasal protrusion, and this is ideal at 143 degrees. And this also gives me an idea of her nasal protrusion as well, which we're going to talk about later. Her mental labial angle, so this is the angle created or the indent created from the lower lip down to the chin, and she does have somewhat of a protrusive chin, but I guess her lower lip isn't as protrusive as it needs to be, or it doesn't protrude a little bit downward. I feel like if her lips protrude a little bit more downward, that probably would have helped her be within the ideal range, in my opinion. But for that reason, she doesn't have that. And women tend to have more protrusive chins, and her chin is protrusive, but it's not protrusive enough, I guess you can say. So this is still within the normal range, but this is not within the ideal range. Her facial convexity from the nasion, so the only difference between this is that it's taken from the nasion instead of the glabella, which is the brow region, and hers is at 162. Like I said again last time with the glabella, for this measurement is literally 1 degree off of the ideal range. So this is technically not a flaw by any means necessary because it's literally right there, so it's near to ideal. But if she had more of a nasal bridge protrusion as well, this would have been within the ideal range. And if she had more of a protrusion of the forehead region, this would have been ideal as well. So it's little slight flaws. Her nasal projection is great at 55%. This is at the lower end, but still, this is perfectly fine for a female face. Her nasal width to height projection is 80, and this is perfectly fine again. She does have a very long nose, or lengthy nose, I guess you could say, because it's length. So it goes from the eye line down to the base of the nose, and it divides that by the actual width of the base of the nose. And hers is at 80%, and that is perfectly fine for a female face. Her rictus elan, so these are the 4 measurements for the lips, and I'm going to talk about it right now. Now, her upper lip and her bottom lip, I'm going to say it right now, they're at the same length, as you can see, lengthwise. Now, preferably, you want your upper lip to be past your lower lip. If your upper lip is past your lower lip and you have good nasal protrusion, and you also have good chin protrusion, you should pass all these measurements. And she was around 50-50 with these measurements. So tier 1 goes from the nasal tip down to chin, and her lower lip doesn't really touch the line, but it's slightly beneath the line, and her upper lip is behind that line a little bit more, and it should be 4 millimeters behind and 2 millimeters behind for the lower lip. And I kind of gave her that one because it kind of looks like that. Now her H line goes from her upper lip down to her chin, and you preferably want your bottom lip to touch the line, which it does. And so it kind of touches that line, but it doesn't really pass it or is not behind it, so that's perfectly fine. Her S line goes from the clamella, or the middle of the nose, down to the chin, and you want the upper lip and bottom lip to barely touch it. Now her upper lip and bottom lip are actually a little bit past that line. Now I could have gave her this measurement, but I felt like I couldn't do that, so I gave her a 2. And her burstal line goes from the subnasal down to the chin, and her upper lip passes the line, her lower lip passes the line, but they're the same length. So if her upper lip, like I said again, if her upper lip was a little bit protruded more than the lower lip, this would have been ideal. But like I said again, her upper lip and lower lip are literally the same length, and preferably you want your upper lip to be more protrusive. So that's why I said it's around 50-50 with these lip measurements. Her her nasal mental angle is 132 degrees. Now this is the relationship between the nose and the chin, and like I said again, her nose and the chin has good relationship. But the only difference between this measurement is it also takes the relationship between your facial convexity, right? So if your facial convexity was a little bit too on the rounder side, this measurement will also deviate to that facial convexity, right? All right. So this is still perfect, but this is at the higher end of things. So yeah. But if she did have a upturned nose, and it also takes into account your nose being upturned or not. So for the fact that her nose is not upturned, I could see why it's at the higher end, but she did have a more higher of an upturned nose. This would have been within the middle of the distribution of the ideal range. But nevertheless, it's perfect. Her gonian to mouth relationship is a tier 1, and you preferably want your gonian, so this is the gonian bone, this is the bottom part of the jaw where the angle is created, and you want that to be undercut the mouth line, which hers undercuts the mouth line by a lot. So she does have a long ramus, like I said again. And what this measures to see is if you have an adequate sized jaw for your face, and she does have an adequate sized jaw for her face. Her recession relative to a Frankfurt plan angle, so she does not have any jaw recession. And like I said again, this also takes into account your chin protrusion and your jaw protrusion as well. How much lengthy, if you have a lengthy jaw for your face, and she does have a lengthy mandible for her face and does passes the nasion, and preferably you also want it to pass the glabella, which is the brow region right here. Her brow ridge inclination, so hers is at 13 degrees, and this determines how backwards or how inclined your forehead region is. And hers being 13 degrees is perfectly normal, so that is good. Her nasal tip angle is 121 degrees. This is the last measurement of today, and a nasal tip like this is sharp enough for a female face. Usually females have more upturned noses, but hers is not upturned. But still, this is perfectly fine. Even for a male face, this angle is perfectly fine and within the ideal range. So that will be it. If you want me to do any measurements for you, or if you want me to do any face ratings for you, I'll have my email down in the description, and I'll also have my IG down in the description. Make sure to DM me or email me, and within 24 to 48 hours, I will finish it and give it to you back. And from there, you can just see how attractive you are